The message arrived at 3:47 a.m., cutting through the digital silence like a scream in the dark. The recording was distorted, fragmented, a voice trembling with fear and desperation, fighting against time that had already run out. "If you're hearing this, I didn't back down." The words came in shaky bursts, punctuated by the sound of papers rustling frantically in the background. "The files are hidden in the—" A sharp electronic beep severed the sentence, leaving only the ghost of unfinished revelation hanging in the air. "They're saying it's sabotage, but the real crime's in the data." The sound of glass shattering exploded through the recording, followed by heavy footsteps and the unmistakable scrape of furniture being overturned. In the chaos, a man's voice rose above the din, raw with terror. "Jesus, there, ye—" The line went dead. This was the last communication from Daniel Reyes, a man who had trusted a green logo and learned, too late, that it was just paint over rust. His story began not with grand heroics or noble intentions, but with something far more dangerous: curiosity about numbers that didn't add up.
Chapter 1: The Auditor. Daniel Reyes had never considered himself a revolutionary. At 42, he was the kind of man who paid his taxes early, kept his apartment spotless, and maintained the rigid punctuality that 8 years in the Army had drilled into his bones. His cubicle at EcoVolt's Denver headquarters reflected this meticulous nature. Pens arranged by color, a single-family photo positioned at the exact corner of his monitor, and stacks of financial reports organized with military precision. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd found his way to EcoVolt through idealism. After his discharge, Daniel had wanted to be part of something meaningful, something that would help heal the world rather than wound it further. EcoVolt's mission statement had spoken to him: powering tomorrow, sustainably. The company's promotional materials painted a picture of gleaming wind farms stretching across pristine landscapes, their massive turbines turning lazily against azure skies, each rotation a step toward a cleaner future. But Daniel's job wasn't to dream about that future, it was to audit the present. As a senior financial analyst, he lived in spreadsheets and expense reports, tracking the mundane reality behind the soaring rhetoric. Most days, the work was routine: equipment purchases, maintenance costs, contractor payments, numbers flowing in neat columns, telling stories of budgets and bottom lines. It was a Tuesday morning in October when those numbers first whispered something wrong. Daniel had been reviewing the quarterly safety and maintenance reports, cross-referencing them with insurance claims and equipment replacement costs. The coffee shop across the street was playing jazz that drifted through his slightly open window, mixing with the steady hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic clicking of keyboards around him. It should have been just another morning of corporate accounting, but 3 entries made him pause. 3 turbine failures, all classified as weather-related incidents, all occurring within a 15-mile radius of the same small town in New Mexico. Daniel pulled up the meteorological data for the region. The weather had been remarkably stable during the time frame in question, hardly the severe conditions that would cause catastrophic structural failure. He frowned, adjusting his reading glasses as he dove deeper into the technical reports. The first turbine, designated NM4471, had collapsed on a Tuesday evening in late July. According to the incident report, quote, unprecedented wind shear had caused a critical stress fracture in the tower's base. The second, NM4472, had fallen 6 weeks later during what was described as, quote, severe atmospheric pressure fluctuations. The third, NM4473, had met its end just 2 weeks after that, victim to, quote, unprecedented thermal expansion in extreme heat conditions. But when Daniel cross-referenced these reports with the actual sensor data buried in the technical appendices, a different story emerged. The sensors had been flagging stress fractures and metal fatigue for months before each collapse. Warning after warning had cascaded through the monitoring systems, each one dutifully logged and then apparently ignored. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he must be missing something. Corporate wind farms were complex operations with multiple oversight systems. Surely someone had seen these warnings. Surely there was a reasonable explanation. Daniel spent his lunch break walking around the building's perimeter, trying to shake off the growing unease. EcoVolt's headquarters was a monument to environmental consciousness. Solar panels gleamed across the roof, rainwater collection systems fed into sustainable landscaping, and the parking lot was filled with electric vehicles sporting EcoVolt logos. Everything about the place projected competence and care. But those numbers haunted him. That afternoon, he dug deeper. What he found made his coffee grow cold as he stared at the screen. The three collapsed turbines hadn't just been in the same region. They had all been positioned along the western edge of a Navajo reservation. More troubling still, the insurance payouts for their replacement had been processed with unusual speed, and the replacement turbines had been installed in different locations entirely. Daniel's military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was now screaming. He began polling records systematically, looking for patterns. What he discovered over the next several days painted a picture that made him question everything he thought he knew about his employer. The Navajo community of Bitter Springs had filed multiple complaints about the turbines in the months before their collapse. Residents reported strange vibrations that kept them awake at night, cracks appearing in their home foundations, and unusual sounds coming from the turbine installations. Each complaint had been filed with EcoVolt's Community Relations Department and subsequently buried in bureaucratic process. More damning was what Daniel found in the maintenance schedules. The stress sensors on all three turbines had been flagged for replacement or recalibration multiple times, but the work orders had been repeatedly deferred due to budget constraints and scheduling conflicts. Meanwhile, the turbines in wealthier communities had received immediate attention for far less critical issues. As Daniel compiled his findings, a pattern of systematic negligence emerged. EcoVolt wasn't just ignoring safety warnings, they were actively managing risk by placing their most problematic installations in communities with the least political power. When those installations inevitably failed, the company could claim natural disaster, collect insurance money, and rebuild elsewhere. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was working for a company that was literally profiting from environmental racism, hiding behind a green logo while treating native communities as acceptable collateral damage. Daniel sat in his cubicle that evening long after his colleagues had gone home. The cleaning crew moved quietly through the office, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces, their invisible presence a reminder of all the invisible labor that kept the corporate machine running. Through his window, he could see the EcoVolt logo glowing against the Denver skyline, its stylized wind turbine symbol rotating slowly in green neon. He thought about his father, who had worked 30 years in a steel mill before lung disease claimed him at 63. His father had believed in honest work, in companies that stood behind their products and treated their workers fairly. What would he think of his son now, discovering that his employer's green promises were built on a foundation of calculated negligence? Daniel made a decision that would change everything. So he began copying files.
Chapter 2. The Documentation.
Over the following weeks, Daniel developed a routine that bordered on the obsessive. He arrived at work early and stayed late, using the quiet hours to methodically document what he was discovering. His military background served him well. He knew the importance of building an airtight case, of having evidence that could withstand scrutiny. The deeper he dug, the more disturbing the picture became. EcoVolt's internal communications revealed a company culture where profits were prioritized over people with stunning casualness. Email threads discussed Native communities as low-impact demographics whose complaints could be safely ignored. Executive memos referred to equipment failures in these areas as acceptable loss thresholds. One email from a regional manager particularly chilled him. The Bitter Springs installation is showing critical stress indicators again. Recommend we let it ride until failure rather than invest in expensive repairs. The community has no media connections and limited legal resources. Cleanup costs will be significantly lower than maintenance. Daniel printed everything, organizing the evidence in file folders that he kept locked in his desk. At night, he would take photographs of key documents with his personal phone, storing the images in an encrypted cloud account. He was building a case that could bring down EcoVolt's entire Southwest operation, but he was also building a target on his back. The first sign that he might have been noticed came during a team meeting in early November. Lisa Cho, his supervisor, was reviewing quarterly performance metrics when she paused to look directly at him. "Daniel, I notice you've been accessing a lot of historical data lately. Working on something special?" The room fell silent. Daniel felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained steady. "Just trying to understand some patterns in the maintenance costs. Want to make sure we're not missing anything in our projections." Lisa's smile was tight. "Admirable thoroughness. But remember, sometimes looking too deep into old data can distract from current priorities. We need to focus on moving forward, not relitigating the past." The message was clear, and it wasn't subtle. Daniel nodded and kept his expression neutral, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. Someone was watching his data access patterns. His cover was blown, even if they didn't yet know how much he had discovered. That evening, Daniel took a detour on his way home, driving through downtown Denver's maze of one-way streets to ensure he wasn't being followed. Paranoia was a luxury he could no longer afford to dismiss. At a Kinko's near the university, he printed copies of the most damning documents and loaded them into a safety deposit box at a credit union across town. He also made a decision that would prove fateful. He reached out to the media. Naomi Carter had built her reputation as an investigative journalist by taking on stories that other reporters wouldn't touch. Industrial accidents, environmental crimes, the intersection of business interests and regulatory capture. These were her specialties. Her byline had appeared on exposés that had toppled executives and triggered federal investigations. Daniel had read her work for years, following her coverage of industrial accidents that had devastated communities across the American West. She had a particular focus on how environmental disasters disproportionately affected marginalized communities, making her the perfect choice for the EcoVolt story. Their first contact was through an encrypted messaging app. Daniel's initial message was brief and careful. "I have information about corporate environmental crimes, documented evidence of systematic safety violations affecting Native communities. Are you interested?" Her response came within hours. "Always interested in corporate environmental crimes. Can you verify your credibility?" Daniel sent her a single document, an internal EcoVolt memo discussing acceptable risk thresholds for turbine installations on tribal lands. It was damning enough to prove his access, but not so comprehensive as to reveal his full hand. Naomi's reply was immediate. "We need to meet, in person, tomorrow."
Chapter 3. The Contact. The diner where they met was the kind of place where conversations were lost in the clatter of plates and the hiss of coffee machines. Located in a strip mall on the outskirts of Aurora, it attracted truck drivers, shift workers, and people who valued anonymity over atmosphere. Daniel arrived first, choosing a booth in the back corner where he could watch both the entrance and the kitchen. Naomi Carter was smaller than he had expected, probably no more than 5'4", with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a worn leather jacket and carried a messenger bag that looked like it had survived several war zones. But her eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in details with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to danger. "Daniel?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from him. He nodded, suddenly unsure how to begin. In his preparation for this meeting, he had focused on organizing the evidence, not on the human element of actually betraying his employer. Naomi seemed to sense his hesitation. "First time doing this? Is it that obvious? You look like you're about to throw up. It's normal." She signaled the waitress for coffee. "Want to tell me what you've got?" Daniel opened his laptop and turned it toward her. For the next 2 hours, he walked her through his findings, the pattern of turbine failures, the ignored safety warnings, the dismissive internal communications. Naomi listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting to see supporting documents. "This is good," she said finally, "really good, but it's also dangerous. EcoVolt has deep pockets and a legal team that specializes in destroying whistleblowers. They'll come after you with everything they have." "What do you mean?" "Criminal charges for corporate espionage, civil suits for breach of contract. They'll claim you hacked systems, stole proprietary information, violated trade secrets. Even if you ultimately win, the process will destroy your life." Daniel felt the diner's warmth drain away. "So you won't run the story?" "I didn't say that." Naomi leaned forward. "But we need to be smart about this. We can't just publish a single article and hope for the best. EcoVolt will have their response prepared before the story even goes live. They'll flood the zone with counter-narratives, deploy crisis management firms, and turn you into the villain." "Then what do you suggest?" "We coordinate a massive, simultaneous release. Multiple news outlets, multiple platforms, all at once. Make it impossible for them to contain. But that means we need more than what you've shown me. We need smoking gun evidence, internal communications that are so damning they can't be spun or denied." Daniel thought about the files still locked in his desk, the photographs stored in his encrypted account. He had more evidence, much more, but sharing it would cross a line from which there could be no return. "There's something else," Naomi said, lowering her voice. "You need to understand that once we do this, your old life is over. Even if we win, even if EcoVolt goes down in flames, you'll never work in corporate America again. You'll be labeled a traitor, a security risk. Some people will see you as a hero, but employers will see you as a liability." Daniel stared at his coffee, watching steam rise from the dark surface. He thought about his father, about the communities living in the shadow of compromised turbines, and about all the future failures that would happen if nothing changed. "How long do you need?" he asked. "Give me everything you have. I'll need 2 weeks to verify sources, reach out to other outlets, and build the consortium. Can you keep digging for 2 more weeks without getting caught?" Daniel nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. They exchanged encrypted contact information and protocols for secure file transfer. As they prepared to leave, Naomi grabbed his arm. "Daniel, once we start this, there's no going back. Are you absolutely sure?" He thought about the people of Bitter Springs, about the cracks in their foundations and the sleepless nights. He thought about the executives who had calculated that their suffering was an acceptable cost of doing business. "I'm sure."
Chapter 4. The investigation deepens.
The 2 weeks that followed were a masterclass in corporate espionage, disguised as routine work. Daniel became a ghost in his own office, arriving early to access sensitive systems before his colleagues, staying late to photograph documents after the cleaning crew had gone home. He developed an almost supernatural awareness of his surroundings, tracking the movements of security cameras, memorizing the schedules of night security guards, learning which elevator banks were monitored and which stairwells provided camera-free zones. His military training served him well. He moved with purpose but never urgency, maintaining the appearance of a dedicated employee while systematically documenting years of corporate malfeasance. The hardest part wasn't accessing the information, it was maintaining his composure while discovering just how deep EcoVolt's corruption ran. The company's crimes extended far beyond the 3 collapsed turbines that had first caught his attention. Internal documents revealed a pattern of regulatory capture that spanned multiple states and federal agencies. EcoVolt had been systematically placing former employees in key regulatory positions, creating a revolving door that ensured their violations would be overlooked or minimized. One email thread particularly sickened him. It detailed a strategy called community fragmentation, where EcoVolt would identify potential opposition leaders in affected communities and either co-opt them through employment offers or discredit them through targeted legal harassment. The company maintained detailed profiles of activists, tribal leaders, and local politicians, complete with personal financial information and potential pressure points. Daniel discovered that Sarah Bigay, a Navajo grandmother who had led the complaints about the Bitter Springs turbines, had been subjected to a coordinated harassment campaign. EcoVolt had hired private investigators to dig into her past, looking for anything that could be used to discredit her. When that failed, they had used their connections with local law enforcement to have her arrested on trumped-up trespassing charges when she tried to document turbine damage on what she claimed was tribal land. The more Daniel learned, the more he understood that he wasn't just exposing safety violations. He was uncovering a systematic campaign of environmental racism backed by corporate power and regulatory capture. EcoVolt had turned environmental protection into a weapon against the very communities that environmental laws were supposed to protect. But his investigation was becoming more dangerous. Lisa Cho had started asking pointed questions about his work schedule, and IT had begun requiring additional authorization for access to historical data. Daniel could feel the net tightening around him, but he was so close to having everything Naomi needed. The breakthrough came during his final weekend in the office. Working under the cover of catching up on quarterly reports, Daniel accessed the executive email servers using administrative credentials he had quietly obtained weeks earlier. What he found there was beyond his worst fears. EcoVolt executives hadn't just known about the safety problems, they had actively planned to let the turbines fail. Internal projections showed that allowing catastrophic failures in low-income communities and collecting insurance payouts was more profitable than proper maintenance. The executives referred to this as managed obsolescence and had calculated the exact failure rates that would maximize profits while minimizing media attention. One email from CEO Robert Steinman to the board of directors was particularly damning. Our actuarial analysis shows optimal profit margins when failure rates in Tier 3 communities, rural, low-income, minority, reach 12 to 15% annually. Insurance payouts exceed maintenance costs by 300%, and legal exposure remains minimal due to these communities' limited resources. Recommend we continue current maintenance deferrals in target demographics. Daniel sat in his darkened office, illuminated only by the glow of his computer screen, and felt something break inside him. These weren't corporate miscalculations or bureaucratic oversights. These were calculated decisions to treat human lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of profit margins. He copied everything,
financial projections, actuarial analyses, communications with insurance companies, lobbying strategies, even vacation photos from executive retreats where these policies had been planned and celebrated. By the time he finished, he had assembled a digital archive that could end careers and trigger criminal investigations. But as he prepared to leave the office that Sunday night, he made a mistake that would prove fatal. In his exhaustion and anger, he forgot one of the basic rules of corporate espionage: always cover your digital tracks. The email servers logged every access, every file opened, every document copied. When the IT security team reviewed the weekend's activity on Monday morning, they would see Daniel's digital fingerprints all over the most sensitive files in the company. He had perhaps 12 hours before they discovered what he had done.
Chapter 5. The Leak. Daniel drove home that night knowing his time had run out. The weight of what he had discovered pressed down on him like a physical force, making it difficult to concentrate on the road. He kept checking his rearview mirror, though he wasn't sure whether he was looking for corporate security, law enforcement, or something worse. His apartment, usually a refuge of ordered calm, felt exposed and vulnerable. He drew the curtains and began the process of transferring the stolen files to Naomi Carter. The encrypted upload would take hours, time he might not have. While the files transferred, Daniel tried to process the magnitude of what he had uncovered. EcoVolt wasn't just another corrupt corporation cutting corners to maximize profits. It was a predatory organization that had systematically identified and exploited the most vulnerable communities in America, using environmental protection as a screen smoke for environmental racism. The company's internal documents revealed a sophisticated understanding of power dynamics and regulatory capture that would have impressed Machiavelli. EcoVolt had mapped out exactly which communities lacked the political connections to fight back, which regulatory agencies could be captured through strategic hiring, and which media outlets could be influenced by advertising dollars. At 3:17 a.m., his secure phone buzzed with a message from Naomi. "Got everything. Holy shit, Daniel. This is bigger than either of us imagined. We're going live tomorrow night simultaneously across 5 major outlets: Washington Post, Guardian, NPR, 60 Minutes, and ProPublica. Are you ready?" Daniel stared at the message, his finger hovering over the keyboard. Once he confirmed, there would be no going back. By this time tomorrow, his name would be synonymous with one of the largest corporate environmental scandals in American history. He thought about Sarah Begay and the other residents of Bitter Springs, about the future turbine failures that would be prevented, about his father who had believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. "I'm ready," he typed. But EcoVolt was ready too. At 6:47 a.m., Daniel was awakened by his apartment's security system. 3 black SUVs had pulled into the parking lot, disgorging men in dark suits who moved with the purposeful efficiency of corporate security. They weren't trying to hide. This was a show of force designed to intimidate. Daniel grabbed his go bag, a paranoia-inspired precaution he had prepared weeks earlier, and slipped out through his apartment's back entrance. His motorcycle was parked in the adjacent lot, chosen specifically for its ability to navigate terrain that would stop pursuit vehicles. As he rode through Denver's early morning traffic, Daniel's phone exploded with missed calls and text messages. Lisa Cho, HR representatives, corporate security, even some numbers he didn't recognize. The message was clear. EcoVolt knew what he had done and was mobilizing every resource to stop him. But it was too late. The story was already in motion, distributed across multiple newsrooms and beyond the reach of corporate suppression. All Daniel had to do was survive until it went public. He spent the day moving between safe locations, coffee shops with multiple exits, libraries with public computer access, bookstores with crowds that provided anonymity. At each stop, he monitored news feeds and social media, watching for any sign that EcoVolt was getting ahead of the story. The company's response was swift and predictable. By noon, EcoVolt had issued a statement claiming that a disgruntled former employee had illegally accessed proprietary information and was attempting to damage the company through fabricated evidence. They announced that they had turned the matter over to federal law enforcement and were pursuing both criminal charges and civil remedies. Daniel's personal information, his employment history, financial records, even details about his military service began appearing on corporate-friendly websites. EcoVolt's crisis management firm was painting him as an unstable individual with a history of insubordination and potential mental health issues. But Naomi and her consortium of journalists were ready for the counterattack. They had spent weeks verifying every document, confirming every source, and building a bulletproof case that could withstand the inevitable legal challenges. At 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the story broke simultaneously across multiple platforms. EcoVolt's deadly deception, how a green energy giant targeted minority communities for profit, appeared on the Washington Post's homepage just as NPR began broadcasting a special investigative report, and The Guardian published its own extensive analysis. Daniel watched the coverage from a hotel room in Colorado Springs, paid for with cash and registered under a false name. Social media exploded as the story spread. #EcoVolt files trending worldwide within hours. The evidence was so comprehensive, so damning that even EcoVolt's most sophisticated damage control efforts couldn't contain it. But as Daniel celebrated what felt like vindication, he had no idea that EcoVolt's retaliation was just beginning.
Chapter 6. The Manhunt. The transformation of Daniel Reyes from whistleblower to fugitive happened with stunning speed. Within 24 hours of the story's publication, federal agents had raided his apartment. EcoVolt had obtained emergency injunctions freezing his assets, and his photograph was being broadcast on news channels across the country, not as a heroic truth-teller, but as a wanted cybercriminal. EcoVolt's counteroffensive was masterful in its ruthlessness. The company's legal team had convinced a federal judge that Daniel posed an ongoing threat to national infrastructure, arguing that his illegal intrusion into their systems could have compromised sensitive information about energy grid vulnerabilities. The cybersecurity angle gave them cover to invoke post-9/11 anti-terrorism statutes, transforming a corporate whistleblower case into a matter of national security. Daniel learned about the warrant for his arrest through a push notification on his burner phone. Former EcoVolt employee wanted for corporate espionage, cyber terrorism. The accompanying mugshot was his official company headshot, but the headlines made him sound like a dangerous radical rather than a concerned accountant. From his hiding place in a roadside motel outside Pueblo, Daniel watched his life being systematically destroyed on television. EcoVolt had hired the same crisis management firm that had rehabilitated tobacco companies at oil giants, and their media strategy was devastatingly effective. Former colleagues appeared on news programs describing him as always strange, obsessed with conspiracy theories, and increasingly erratic in his final months. His military service, initially presented as evidence of his credibility, was reframed as potential evidence of PTSD and unstable behavior. Even his methodical documentation of EcoVolt's crimes was twisted into proof of his obsessive and potentially dangerous personality. But the most painful betrayal came from someone he had trusted.
Lisa Cho, his former supervisor, appeared on a primetime news program 2 nights after the story broke. Sitting in EcoVolt's gleaming conference room, she expressed deep sadness about Daniel's descent into paranoid delusion. "We tried to help him," she said, her voice heavy with manufactured regret. "Daniel had been showing signs of instability for months, accessing files he had no business reviewing, staying late to work on unauthorized projects, making wild accusations about company policies. We even suggested he take advantage of our employee assistance program for mental health support." The interviewer leaned forward sympathetically. "Did you ever suspect he might resort to illegal activity?" She shook her head sadly. "We knew he was struggling, but we never imagined he would fabricate evidence to support his delusions. The documents he's released have been altered, taken out of context, or completely fabricated. It's heartbreaking to see someone destroy their life and potentially harm our mission of environmental protection." Daniel threw his hotel room's remote control at the television, shattering the screen. The lies were so smooth, so believable, that he almost doubted his own memories. But he knew the truth. Every document was authentic, every email real, every piece of evidence verifiable. That's when his burner phone rang. The caller ID showed only numbers, but Daniel recognized the voice immediately. "Daniel, thank God you're safe." It was Lisa Cho, but her voice was completely different from the composed executive who had just appeared on television. She sounded terrified. "Lisa, what the hell?" "Listen to me carefully. That interview was filmed 3 days ago under duress. They knew you'd talk, Daniel. They wanted a villain, someone to blame when the truth came out. I'm calling from a payphone because they're monitoring everything." Daniel's mind raced. "What are you talking about?" EcoVolt didn't just know about the safety problems, they engineered them. The whole thing was a strategy to collect insurance payouts while testing how much they could get away with in vulnerable communities. But the plan required a fall guy when it eventually came to light. A fall guy? You, Daniel. They identified you months ago as someone with the access and moral compass to uncover the scheme. They wanted you to find the evidence, they wanted you to go to the media, and they were ready with a complete character assassination campaign the moment you acted. Daniel felt the room spinning around him. "You're saying this was all planned?" "Not the specific details, but the broad strokes. They knew someone would eventually discover what they were doing, so they prepared to destroy that person's credibility while simultaneously using the scandal to push out executives who were becoming liabilities. Robert Steinman announced his retirement this afternoon with a full golden parachute, claiming he was deeply disappointed by the betrayal of a trusted employee." Jesus Christ! "Daniel, you need to run. Really run. They've convinced federal law enforcement that you're a terrorist who compromised critical infrastructure. The manhunt isn't just about corporate embarrassment. They've made this a national security issue." The line crackled with static, and Lisa's voice became urgent. "I have to go. They're tracking call patterns. But Daniel, the real files, the ones that prove they planned all this, are in Steinman's private server. If you can get to them—" The call ended abruptly, leaving Daniel staring at a dead phone in a dark motel room surrounded by the wreckage of his former life.
Chapter 7. The Truth Behind the Truth. Daniel spent the next week moving constantly, following a route through small towns and back roads that would make him nearly impossible to track. He had enough cash to stay mobile for perhaps a month, but he knew he couldn't run forever. The federal manhunt was tightening, and EcoVolt's narrative was becoming accepted truth in mainstream media. Meanwhile, the original story about EcoVolt's safety violations was being overshadowed by the drama of the manhunt itself. Cable news programs ran endless speculation about Daniel's whereabouts and psychological state, while the systematic endangerment of Native communities became a footnote to the larger story of corporate espionage and cyberterrorism. It was a masterful piece of narrative manipulation. EcoVolt had successfully transformed a story about corporate crime into a story about individual criminal behavior.
They were simultaneously the victim of a dangerous rogue employee and the responsible corporation taking decisive action to protect national security. But Lisa Cho's final words haunted Daniel. The real files were in Steinman's private server. If there was evidence that EcoVolt had orchestrated his whistleblowing as part of a larger strategy, it would vindicate him and expose the company's true nature. The problem was access. Steinman's private server would be military-grade secure, physically isolated and monitored by both corporate security and federal law enforcement. Getting to those files would require resources Daniel didn't have, and skills beyond his accounting background. That's when he remembered Marcus Webb. Marcus had been his roommate during the final year of their Army service, a signals intelligence specialist whose talents had attracted attention from some very unofficial organizations. After discharge, Marcus had disappeared into the gray world of private security contractors and freelance digital forensics, occasionally surfacing to help veterans navigate bureaucratic battles with the VA. Daniel had Marcus's emergency contact information memorized, a series of coded messages posted to an obscure ham radio forum that would trigger a secure communication protocol. It was paranoid even by military standards, but Marcus had always been paranoid about electronic surveillance. The response came within hours. Coordinates for a meeting in an abandoned gas station outside Alamosa, Colorado. Marcus looked exactly as Daniel remembered him. Tall, lean, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that never quite focused on what they were supposed to be looking at. He arrived in a battered pickup truck that probably contained more computing power than most university research labs. "Heard you stepped in it pretty good," Marcus said by way of greeting. "Corporate espionage, cyber terrorism, manhunt by federal agents. You always were an overachiever." "It's not what they're saying, Marcus." "Of course it's not. Corporate spin is their whole business model." Marcus lit a cigarette and studied Daniel with the same analytical intensity he'd once applied to encrypted enemy communications. "Question is, what do you want to do about it?" Daniel explained what Lisa had told him about Steinman's private server and the evidence that might vindicate him and expose the company's true nature. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking technical questions about EcoVolt's security infrastructure. "It's doable," Marcus said finally, "but it's not a hacking job, it's a heist. Steinman's server isn't connected to the internet, it's air-gapped, physically secured, probably in his home office or a private facility. We'd need physical access." "We?" Marcus grinned, and for a moment Daniel saw the young soldier who had once infiltrated Taliban communications networks for fun. "Brother, you just offered me the chance to take down a corporation that's been systematically screwing over native communities while hiding behind environmental protection. You think I'm going to pass that up?" They spent the next 2 days planning an operation that would have impressed their old unit commanders. Marcus used his contacts in private security to map out Steinman's personal security arrangements, while Daniel provided intelligence about EcoVolt's corporate culture and executive schedules. Robert Steinman lived in a fortress-like mansion in Cherry Hills Village, one of Denver's most exclusive neighborhoods. The property was surrounded by high walls, monitored by private security, and equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance systems. But Marcus had identified a vulnerability. Steinman's weekly routine included a private poker game at the Denver Athletic Club, leaving his home office unguarded for approximately 4 hours every Thursday evening. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would disable the security systems, while Daniel, using his insider knowledge of EcoVolt's operations, navigated the corporate files to find the smoking gun evidence. They would have 2 hours maximum before security protocols triggered automatic alerts. But as they prepared for the break-in, neither man realized that EcoVolt was setting its final trap.
Chapter 8: The Final Gambit. Thursday evening arrived with an October snowfall that would provide perfect cover for their operation. Daniel and Marcus positioned themselves in the woods behind Steinman's property, watching the mansion's lights dim as the executive departed for his weekly poker game. Marcus's intelligence had been perfect. The security systems went dark exactly as predicted, victim to carefully placed signal jammers and a malware payload that Marcus had been developing for situations just like this. They moved across the manicured grounds like ghosts, avoiding motion sensors and camera blind spots with the precision of their military training.
Steinman's home office was a monument to corporate ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, walls lined with awards and photographs documenting his rise through the energy industry, and a desk that probably cost more than Daniel's annual salary. But their target was the innocuous metal cabinet in the corner, housing servers that contained EcoVolt's most sensitive communications. Daniel plugged in Marcus's custom hardware while his partner monitored security feeds from a tablet that showed green lights across all systems. Everything was proceeding perfectly. Too perfectly. The servers contained exactly what Lisa Cho had promised: communications between Steinman and EcoVolt's crisis management firm detailing their controlled whistleblower strategy. The plan had been breathtaking in its cynical sophistication. EcoVolt had identified Daniel as a potential threat months earlier, not to eliminate him, but to use him. Internal memos revealed the company's calculation that environmental scandals were inevitable given their business model. Rather than change their practices, they had decided to manage the scandals by controlling the narrative. They would allow a mid-level employee to discover damaging information, ensure that employee went public, and then destroy that person's credibility while positioning themselves as victims of corporate espionage. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, reading over Daniel's shoulder. "They played you from the beginning." But the most damning evidence was still downloading when Daniel heard something that made his blood freeze: the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. "We've got company," Marcus said, checking his tablet. The security feed showed 4 black SUVs surrounding the mansion, disgorging federal agents in tactical gear. "This is a setup, Daniel. They knew we were coming." Daniel's mind raced through the implications. Lisa Cho's phone call, the precise intelligence about Steinman's routine, the perfectly timed security vulnerabilities, it had all been too convenient. EcoVolt had orchestrated this final act as well, luring him into a federal crime that would completely discredit any evidence he might present. "How long for the download?" 3 minutes. "We don't have 3 minutes." Through the office windows, Daniel could see tactical teams positioning themselves around the property. Red laser dots danced across the walls as sniper rifles found their targets. Someone was speaking through a bullhorn, ordering them to surrender, but he couldn't make out the words over the sound of his own pulse. Marcus was already packing his equipment. "We abort now, we might get out alive. We stay for the files, we're definitely going to prison." Daniel stared at the download progress bar. 73% complete. Those files contained proof that EcoVolt had systematically targeted minority communities for profit. Evidence that could trigger federal investigations and criminal prosecutions. More importantly, they contained proof that he had been manipulated, that his entire journey from concerned employee to fugitive whistleblower had been orchestrated by the very company he thought he was exposing. "Daniel," Marcus grabbed his arm, "we go now or we don't go at all." The progress bar hit 96%. Daniel thought about Sarah Bagay and the other residents of Bitter Springs, about all the future communities that would suffer if EcoVolt's model went unchallenged. He thought about his father, who had died believing that honest work and moral courage meant something in America. 96%, he said quietly. Marcus stared at him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "You stubborn bastard." The download completed just as the first flashbang grenade exploded in the mansion's main hallway. Daniel yanked the storage device from the server and tossed it to Marcus. "Get this to Naomi Carter. Everything we talked about is in there." "What about you?" Daniel looked at the tactical teams surrounding the building, at the red laser dots painting the walls around them. He had always known this moment would come, the point where he would have to choose between his own survival and the truth he had uncovered. "Someone has to take responsibility for the break-in. If we both run, they'll claim we destroyed evidence. If I surrender, you can get away with the real story." Marcus tried to argue, but Daniel was already moving toward the office door, his hands raised above his head. The last thing he saw was his friend disappearing through the office's rear window, carrying with him the evidence that would either vindicate Daniel's actions or disappear forever into EcoVolt's narrative machine.
Epilogue: The Reckoning. The arrest was broadcast live on every major news network. Daniel Reyes, the EcoVolt cyber terrorist, being led away in handcuffs from the CEO's ransacked office, his face a mask of defiant resignation. The images became iconic. The whistleblower who had gone too far, the environmental activist who had become the very criminal he claimed to oppose. EcoVolt's statement was swift and decisive. They expressed profound sadness that Daniel's mental deterioration had led to such desperate actions. They praised federal law enforcement for preventing what could have been a catastrophic compromise of critical infrastructure. Most importantly, they announced a comprehensive internal review of all safety procedures led by an independent consulting firm that would ensure nothing like the fabricated Bitter Springs incident could be used to attack the company again. But Marcus Webb had kept his promise. 3 days after Daniel's arrest, a new tranche of documents appeared simultaneously on WikiLeaks, The Guardian's secure drop platform, and scattered across social media through thousands of anonymous accounts. These files told a different story entirely. The real story of how EcoVolt had orchestrated Daniel's downfall as part of a broader strategy to control environmental scandals. The evidence was overwhelming. Email chains showed EcoVolt executives celebrating their successful narrative management of the Bitter Springs crisis. Financial records revealed payments to private investigators who'd been tracking Daniel for months before his first contact with Naomi Carter. Most damning of all were the communications with federal law enforcement showing how EcoVolt had used its connections to transform a corporate whistleblower case into a terrorism investigation. The second wave of revelations triggered the very federal investigations that EcoVolt had sought to prevent. Senate hearings revealed the extent of the company's regulatory capture. Environmental groups launched lawsuits on behalf of affected communities. International investors began divesting from EcoVolt's green energy projects. But for Daniel Reyes, vindication came too late. The final recording found its way to news outlets through encrypted channels that investigators never identified. It was the last communication from Daniel's burner phone, made from a federal holding cell in the hours before his death. If you're hearing this, I didn't back down. The files are hidden in the server. They're saying it's sabotage, but the real crime's in the data. The audio captured the sound of his cell door opening, voices ordering him to step back, then a scuffle, and what the coroner's report described as the sound of a prisoner resisting restraint. The recording ended with what forensic analysts confirmed was a single gunshot. The official cause of death was listed as suicide during an escape attempt. The federal investigation concluded that Daniel had overpowered a guard and was killed when he attempted to grab the officer's weapon. Security camera footage of the incident was ruled inadmissible due to technical malfunctions that may have compromised the chain of evidence. EcoVolt settled the resulting wrongful death suit for $1.8 billion, distributed among affected communities and Daniel's family. The company admitted no wrongdoing and included a non-disclosure agreement that prevented discussion of the settlement terms. Their next advertising campaign featured diverse families in pristine natural settings, with the tagline, "Renewing Trust, Powering Tomorrow." Robert Steinman retired to a private estate in the Cayman Islands. Lisa Cho took early retirement and moved to a small town in Oregon where she taught accounting at a community college. Marcus Webb disappeared entirely.
his last known communication an encrypted message to Naomi Carter. The truth is out there now. It's up to everyone else to decide what to do with it. Sarah Begay and the other residents of Bitter Springs received settlement checks that allowed them to relocate to safer communities. The damaged turbines were never replaced, leaving scars in the desert landscape that served as monuments to corporate indifference and regulatory failure. But Daniel Reyes's story didn't end with his death. The documents he died to protect became the foundation for new environmental protection legislation. The Reyes Act required independent safety monitoring of renewable energy installations and created protected status for environmental whistleblowers. Universities established fellowships in his name for students studying the intersection of environmental justice and corporate accountability. Most importantly, his sacrifice inspired a generation of corporate employees to speak truth to power, knowing that someone had been willing to pay the ultimate price to protect vulnerable communities from predatory corporations. In the end, Daniel Reyes had achieved something that EcoVolt's sophisticated narrative management could never contain. He had become a symbol of moral courage in an age of corporate impunity. His story served as a reminder that behind every environmental crisis, behind every regulatory failure, behind every corporate scandal, there are individual human beings making choices between personal safety and moral responsibility. The green logo of EcoVolt continued to rotate in neon displays across the country, promising a sustainable future powered by clean energy. But for those who remember Daniel Reyes, that logo would always serve as a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful promises are just paint over rust, and that the price of exposing that truth can be measured in human lives. The truth, as Daniel had learned too late, was never just about the numbers. It was about the people behind the numbers and the courage required to protect them when the numbers revealed uncomfortable realities about power, privilege, and the cost of speaking truth in a world that's designed to silence it. His final message, preserved in digital amber across countless servers and social media posts, continued to echo long after its author had been silenced. They're saying it's sabotage, but the real crime's in the data. The data lived on. The truth lived on. And somewhere in the vast digital ecosystem of modern America, other potential whistleblowers read Daniel's story and made their own calculations about the price of moral courage in corporate America. Some would choose silence. Others would choose to speak. The choice, as Daniel Reyes had discovered, was what separated heroes from bystanders in the ongoing struggle between corporate power and human dignity. His legacy was not just the specific crimes he had exposed, but the example he had set for others who would face the same impossible choice between personal survival and moral responsibility. In the end, he had chosen truth over safety, others over self, and justice over comfort. It was a choice that had cost him everything, and it was a choice that had changed everything.